in stocks, and there's always over speculation in real estate. That's just the norm in every bubble. But I mentioned a bubble once before, and the bubble in land prices, for example, when the value of land, people keep bidding against each other to buy land, where the price keeps getting up, growing bigger and bigger, more than what the actual real value is. And so the bubble means there's not really anything backing up the price. And what happened in 1873, the bubble in stocks, land, and gold burst. Just pop, and prices tumble. And this can be bad for a lot of reasons, but partially people borrowed a lot of money. They borrowed a lot of money to buy stocks or buy land or buy gold, and then they couldn't pay back their debts. That is a picture of a run on a bank. And bank panics, this bank panic lasted 5 years. And what happened is the banks, they loaned out all the money they had. And when people who had their savings in the bank and thought it was safe went running with their deposit slips. When you ever see a pen, it's always represented by a piece of paper, implying this was supposed to be worth money and now it's not. And that's the panic part. And they're trying to get the savings out of that bank, and they're beating them off and shutting the door. And if you had savings in a bank in 1874, or whenever approximately that time, and that bank went under, what happened to your savings? Gone. And people lost some 700 billion in today's dollars of savings during this panic. And so that's when the bubble burst. But it was also the biggest cause of a panic or an economic bust is another overproduction. Oversupply is the same term. And it was railroads and all the things that took the big railroads, steel, coal, whatever it might be. Railroad overproduction. And what happened is they produced more than what people could use. It saturated the market and prices tumbled. But one more thing happened. The U.S. had this very convoluted financial system remember during the Civil War, they had greenbacks, that paper currency. They also had gold coins. Well, partially because somebody tried to corner the gold market, the U.S. adopted the Coinage Act of 1873. And this law, the United States went on, this is what you have to get, the gold standard. The gold standard. Where all dollars will now be exchanged automatically for gold or silver. Britain did this, so the U.S. kind of copied it. And the U.S. would be on this until 1933. And then come back on the gold standard after World War II, slightly in a different way, and then totally off it in 1971 through today. Well, by making it all the gold standard, all the old currency, the greenbacks from the Civil War, became worthless overnight. And this created massive deflation. Boom. And this probably triggered the actual panic, even though it was going to happen anyways. But this just made it. Farmers would call this act the crime of 73. And this created an economic disaster. Now, not only did we have a financial panic, but a recession is a term meaning 3 straight quarters of bad economic growth. But a depression, there's no and we'll come back to recession. So a depression just means, it's vague. It just means long-term high unemployment, long-term low wages. That's a depression. Long-term, meaning demand is low, people aren't buying stuff, people are hoarding their money. It's long-term. There's no set definition. The Great Depression was so bad. It was great, but it was so bad that you guys lived through a depression. By all measure, 2008 to 2013 was a depression. But they didn't want to call it a depression. Because the Great Depression was so bad. That's why they called it the Great Recession. But it was a depression. So, this would trigger a worldwide depression. And the U.S., this wouldn't be the only one the U.S. would trigger. It triggered one in 37, 57, 73, 93, 1907. Are you getting the trend here? And 1920, everyone did, but 1929 too. Oh, in 2008. Let's keep things flowing here. This is just 6 months. 18,000 businesses shut their doors. That means people who thought they were going to have jobs all of a sudden couldn't buy normal daily necessities. Unemployment skyrocketed. It's just an estimate, 20%, but we don't know. Because two things about this. Half the population were farmers. And even if unemployment was 20%, and most people say it was probably higher, but it's just hard to tell, what part of the country was most affected by companies shutting their door? This industrial north and soon to be called more like the Northwest, the old Northwest. Let's say Northwest, I'm sorry, Midwest. This area here. And so there weren't as many people elsewhere, so it was all saturated here. That's part of the reason why you have the Great Compromise and Reconstruction. This was a catastrophe. Took a couple years, but when wages began to plummet, this became a nightmare. And profits are going to go down too. Now, profits and wages are tied together, but when companies aren't making money, that's when they start cutbacks and laying off workers. Even companies who are making money cut wages. Why?
Everybody else is. Following the market, everybody else is cutting wages.
Yes, everyone's cutting wages. And what else?
There's more workers, so we have a higher supply.
Exactly right. Both of you are exactly right. Think about the B&O Railroad. They're making money. But in 1875, when they cut their workers' wages by a third, what did they tell the workers? You complain, there are 1,000 people where they take your job at half of what we're paying you. What did workers do? Just took it. Have no choice. And so they get cut wages and be gouged because they had no choice. And this was happening all over. So B&O Railroad did it in 1876. Cut them again by a third. What did the workers do? They had no choice. But by 1877, you have just massive unemployment. Workers weren't making money. It seemed like the normal daily structure of society was actually breaking down by 1877. It looked that bad in some of these cities. Massive numbers of homeless. You have that weird phenomenon where you have large numbers of homeless people in vacant buildings. You also have people starving and food rotting on the shelves because no one has the money to buy it. 1877 was a bad year. So when the B&O Railroad tried to cut their, look at the bank failures by 1877. The Great Depression, 1829 was a crash, but end of 1932, 33 was the most bank failures. 2008 was the worst of the crash. The biggest issue of the bank issue was 2010 during your lifetime. Isn't it great you could have your own financial panic in your lifetime? And if luck holds straight, we can have another one? I didn't have any. Now I have one. So with that, well, besides the 1873, 93, 1970, okay, so I'm old. The B&O Railroad, when they cut their wages again, that's how the workers said no. Now, don't think in terms of a strike as workers coming together, like let's say the teachers in Los Angeles say you're going to work strike because we want better teaching conditions and smaller classrooms and crazy things like textbooks. I know, can you believe that? But this was more just this upswelling of anger. Starting in Wheeling, West Virginia, right here, workers just said, the hell with it, we're not going to go to work. Or they went and they barricaded the tracks and said, you're not going to use this train until you pay us. Because they knew if they did it alone, they're fired. So they all had to come out together. But it wasn't organized. And soon, the B&O Railroad went up and down the coast, and then one line went to Chicago, and the other line went to St. Louis. It was making money, not near as much as, let's say, 1870. It started east to Pittsburgh and Altoona along these tracks. That's Pittsburgh. Where workers came out and just basically shut down the tracks. So we're not going to operate. In Pennsylvania, they did what governors always did. This is what we have to get down. They sent the militia to put down the strike. To kill a few, to panic them, and force them to work. By the way, that's huge government aid for business. Workers don't like workers don't want to work for what we're paying them, we'll shoot them. But the militia was made up of many of the same people who were scared about their jobs and unemployed. And in Pittsburgh it started. That's Pittsburgh. the militia joined the movement. Remember this happened once before. Remember Shays' rebellion? And then in Altoona they joined. Just like Shays' rebellion back in 1787. And once word of that came out, every governor was scared to send out the militia, and it spread eastward and up and down the coastline, then to other railroads and other industries, and soon to Chicago and to St. Louis. In St. Louis, workers from all different jobs, terrified about a job or not, whether it be laid off, whether or not they could feed their families. They took over the city of St. Louis's government, created their own, for a short time, people's government. They even made their own flag. You know what color it was? You might know the color of revolution. Red, which is the color of patriots' blood. That's where that comes from. The idea is we're true patriots. On it was embroidered a loaf of bread with a sword in it. So these weren't like radicals who want to change the world with some idealistic vision of the future. What were they? Hungry. Yeah, they're hungry. So if any of you want to become a dictator, who's thinking about it? Just remember me. You have to fight it out. Because dictators tend not to be friends. But, I don't know, they seem to like each other. If you want to maintain power, what two things do you need? Make sure people have food, right? And then something to watch. Something with a screen, right? So they can just kind of watch and drool. This is my invitation, so let's say a phone. And then eating, right? Then you can do anything you want. Write that down. That's my prescription for dictatorship. That's no commentary on today's society at all. That's just me making not a ham-fisted effort at all. So, once it spread throughout other jobs, it became known as the Great Upheaval. And this looked like civil war. This looked like revolution. We'll see a similar thing in 1894. Up and down the tracks and then city to city all over the Northeast. And eventually soldiers would be called out, but the pictures aren't very accurate. Hayes, remember he's the one who's in the process of ending military reconstruction? They sent out federal troops, but a lot of them were black soldiers fresh from Reconstruction. And that's why I put down racism. The militia joined the workers because they felt like they were alike. People with the same type of problems. But they used black soldiers because they knew racism would make sure that the workers and the soldiers would not unify. Even though by all rights, they all have the same problems and are very similar to each other, except race. What was that in 1676? That rebellion that led to slave codes and the fornication laws. And we begin that in the city. Bacon's rebellion. This keeps the same trend. Bacon's rebellion, which that's why that's such a big deal. We see this in other instances, but right here, black soldiers would be used, and for the next 60 years, they called, because the army was segregated, so they were called black regiments. And these regiments were partially recruited to put down strikes. That's why there were 2 regiments of black soldiers, or infantry, so they're foot soldiers, who were running wild cities. And they were there in Montana because of all the strikes in the mining regions here, and here. To put down strikes. And you'll see this thought process about using race, and it's not just black and white, it could be others too, down the road. And we'll come back to this again, 1957, like Little Rock Central High, the first school to be integrated in the states of the former Confederacy, the same thinking will happen. This is a big deal. The strike will be put down and over 1,000 people were killed and wounded in the process of ending the strike. This looked like civil war. Now, it was just this upswelling of anger, so it wasn't like a real strike. But a few things came out of this. First off, that's where you get the National Guard. Congress would create a federalized militia, so they wouldn't have that problem. Sometimes they call them National Guard, but they would be supplied by the U.S. The National Guard is supplied by the U.S. government and partially trained by the U.S. government, but they control other states. And that's why you have now this organized, trained, regulated militia. And it would come from this, because partially to put down strikes. Also, another one, workers realized And a lot of people realize, boy, labor has power. If they're organized, they can get real change. Now, it didn't happen very often, but you see an element of this in the early 1900s, the New Deal. And the reforms of the New Deal were because workers were organized for that time. Workers are not organized, so they don't have a lot of power here. Let me rephrase it, they don't know their power. But there's also something else. Capital. Those who had the capital were fearful. They were scared, and they would do whatever it takes to hold their power. Jay Gould, the financier and industrialist, he tried to corner the gold market, help bring down the economy in '73. Gould, in 1877, very publicly, and only partially joking, said, we ought to hire half of the poor people to kill the other half so we can maintain control. And he wasn't really kidding. And that gave an idea of this fight that's going to come. In the next 60 years, no country in the world will have a more violent labor history than the United States. They call it the carnivals of revenge. No country. And the legacy of that would go on for good and bad things depending on your point of view. But how did it happen? One of the things about history is it is really how people interact, how the market interacts, how people make money, and it does come down to government action and politics. How do busts happen? They weren't sure. In 1837, it was just like, are the tides wrong? Is the moon too close? They didn't know. In 1873, only a few people knew. 1893, people disagreed. During the Great Depression, they still disagree. Today, it's still, at least they know how it starts, but how to get out of it or solve that problem. So we got to get a little bit into the boom-bust cycle. So I will follow this for you. Write down the business cycle. Now, leave yourself some room. Got to make a big circle. That might not be enough room. Because we have to do this cycle. It's a big deal. It's a big chart. It's a big circle. It's big time. Now, I've been a Chief fan for over 50 years. I just want you to think about that for a second. It's going on your permanent record. You know, my nephew's a patriot. Yeah, exactly. I refer to him. You could have repented, but no. When we keep whining about this more? Yes. Yeah. Did anyone watch that game? And then there's a coin flip in overtime, and the Chiefs lost the coin flip. And he immediately texts me. The Chiefs ought to work on the coin flipping. Shut up. Two-headed coin. They cheated. Okay, back to real work. Let me complain a little bit more. A boom. So a boom is a big economic time. This is like an economic explosion. We had a slight, not really. You haven't lived through a real boom. Right now, we look like maybe 7-8 months ago, it looked like we might have a boom, but that looks like it's going away. We look like we're sliding down. I don't know. I really don't know. It's one of those things, we can all predict something, and if we're right, we look smart. If we're wrong, we say, the math didn't work. So, never trust an economist, right? You know Harry Truman's famous line about The Economist? Give me a one-armed economist, or give me a one-handed economist. Because every economist comes up to me and says, now this, and this can happen. But on the other hand, this. Okay, so, moving on. I think that's funny. Wages. What happened to wages if there's a boom? Yeah, wages are going up. What's happening to, did you say down?
No, I said stay the same.
No, wait. When there's a boom, what happens to production, aka supply of goods? They're going up. I know you're thinking because profit doesn't change, but here what happens is, if people are selling goods, and that means a lot of companies are really producing a lot, they start bidding with other companies for workers, and that drives the wages up. And what happens to employment? Employment goes up. They're hiring workers. They're all hiring workers.
I think it's just unemployment.
Good save. So they're all hiring workers. And we saw a little bit element of that in the last about a year and a half. Wages were slowly going up. We had kind of a bit of blip in the last 6 months, but we'll see. And so, and what's happening to profits? I'll just tell you. Profits, I already made the arrow. What do we call it? Prices, wages, all these things are going up. What is this called? Is this inflation or deflation? This is inflation. What's happening to demand? People are buying stuff. They want stuff. They want to buy. Buy, buy, buy. And if prices are going up, that encourages people to buy today. And what is something we all need? Hmm? A life? Oh, let's rephrase that. What is a luxury? What we really want. Something we don't really need, but we really want. A goat? A goat. Right? Who wants goats? Yeah. If you know the price of goats are going to go up tomorrow, that goat's going to be 15% more expensive tomorrow. What does that encourage you to do today? And so one of those weird things that inflation in goats leads to increased demand. Which, by the way, if all of us then go out and buy a goat, what happens to the price of goat? To goat. And if everyone starts buying, that increases prices even more. So it's one of those things that kind of cycles and can make prices go up. And so that is when you know the economy is doing good, when inflation starts going up. Now, you can go up too much. And because more companies will start producing more goods, they'll borrow money to increase production. Maybe all those other people are saying, wow, everyone's selling goats. So they'll start their own goat selling businesses. This is a goat-based economy. What's happening to credit and therefore debt? Banks loan money like mad. Banks have almost no requirements because the idea is, if we're all making money, why not loan today? Because tomorrow you'll pay it back. And then if things are really going good and people are buying stuff, if you're a little business, you think, I'm going to borrow money and expand. I can do that, right? Or you want to buy a goat. I'm going to borrow money to buy that goat because tomorrow I'm going to have a job. Tomorrow I'm probably going to get a raise. Why not buy 10 goats, right? It's starting to go up. And two more things. What about confidence? How do people feel during a boom? It's almost a euphoria. It's like we're all getting rich. It's so easy. I'm going to have more money tomorrow. Things are booming. And this encourages all sorts of pretty crazy activity. But there's also a feeling that if there's a boom, people think it'll go on for how long? It happens every single time. Every single time. People, the vast majority of people will think it'll go on forever. I remember the 1990s when that kind of thing was called the tech bubble, technology stocks and technology companies. And it will go on forever. And they would say it's a new economy. And this was normal. Talk about the new economy. We create a new economy. We'd never have a bust again. Nothing will ever crash. Well, the tech economy was basically destroyed in 2000. Just destroyed. Never recovered. In 2004, I remember the head of the Federal Reserve Bank, the most important central banker in the United States, Alan Greenspan, telling people, don't worry about it. If you want to buy another house and take out a mortgage, fine. Take out a second mortgage, fine. Don't worry about it. The housing prices are going to go up and up and up and up. And anyone who said, no, wait a second, it's creating a bubble. No, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a sucker. You're trying to take advantage of me. Every time this happens, and every time it crashes, happened in North Dakota in 2012, 2000. I know people were buying homes in Williston for $700,000, $800,000. And yeah, because, and now they're stuck with, I don't want to think, I feel really bad. I know a couple of them, they lost. they're underwater like $500,000. Yeah, that's starting to get real money. And says, I know one person who did that. He's under $500,000. Great, yeah, nice guy. Just thought the prices will keep going up. And one more thing, this always encourages a wave of speculation. AKA, remember that term, a bubble will grow. Real estate, railroads, something. We're pricing higher. And since banks are loaning money like mad, why not use your little bit of your money as collateral to borrow a whole bunch of money and buy more real estate, buy more stock, buy more whatever, every single time. So what I'm showing you here is a constant. What begins to bring it down is always overproduction. AKA here's the big word, supply. Companies begin to produce more. If they saturate the market, we said this once before, what happens to prices? Prices and revenues begin to do what? All of a sudden, everybody's growing a goat tree. There's goats everywhere. Begins to drop. And when prices begin to drop, here's the problem that people have. So let's say you start that little business. You're producing stuff. You borrowed a bunch of money. Things are going good. Next thing you know, there's a month, I'm not bringing in as much money. The next month, I'm not bringing in as much money. But I still have debts to pay. I still have a payroll to make. I still have to pay off the people supplying my raw materials, whatever it might be. What do? Prices are dropping because of overproduction. What do? You're on the right track. That's it. They produce more. Always. Always. So they might borrow more money to produce more. Now I hope this seems counterintuitive. If everybody's producing too much and the prices are beginning to drop, don't you cut back production? But if you're an individual, got to make your debt payments, you can't cut back. And if you're not making as much, sell more. But if everybody does have the same prices, or same time, prices drop even more. You really see it with farmers, because they're so susceptible to price changes, because it happened literally overnight. This could really affect farm prices. Do you know anybody, maybe it's a family member, try to start a business, a store, maybe a restaurant or something, or you know someone who did it, you can see this little, start a little store, and you can tell they're starting to go through this cycle. If they do something like all of a sudden like these huge sales, like 30% off, or it's a restaurant, they like 3 nights a week, all you can eat. I'm just throwing stuff out there, but they're desperately trying to make up the fact that the prices are so low and they can't pay them. That's a cycle. And I know someone at a bar, and it's tough. So instead of like trying to make it with air, they borrowed money to try to expand. It lasted 2 months. It was a couple, great people, but And once this happens for a while, that is where you get cutbacks. Now, cutbacks, I mean cutbacks in things like, okay, we're not making money, we're gonna have to cut back on production. Laying off workers, not buying as many raw materials. Or another way a cutback is in a whole market. Some companies that started to produce, they go out of business. So that's also a cutback, and all the workers are unemployed. Okay, a cutback. But don't forget, if a company is making products, whatever it might be, we're making cars, and we cut back on production of cars, that means whoever's making the steel has got to cut back on production of steel. That means whoever's making the tires have to cut back on production of tires, and so on. So this can ripple to every part of the economy. And what happens is, if there's cutback, now, what begins to happen to employment? Workers are laid off. By the way, are they lazy? What philosophy says, they're lazy, they won't work unless they're made to? Yeah. A social Darwinistic look would say they're lazy, but the problem with that is, okay, there might be lazy ones and not lazy ones, that's what life is. But companies, the people who have the capital, they won't hire workers unless there's someone there to buy it. And if there's no one there to buy it, that means they lay workers off and they starve. And it's a panic that is terrifying. And once this happens, what happens to demand? Demand begins to drop. If demand begins to drop, people begin to buy less. If people begin to buy less, what happens to prices? Prices drop even more, triggering more cutbacks, triggering more unemployment, triggering less demand, and so on. By the way, you notice we haven't got back to the bubble? This is when the bubble hits. The bubble burst when all these profits begin to drop, and also the realization hit, all these assets, like stock or real estate that we thought were worth so much, they're not. And the prices tumble. And it's right here that the bubbles burst. So in your lifetime, it's 2000. Well, 2007, the bubble began to burst, but it really exploded in 2008. That's in your lifetime. It was a smaller scale in 2001 or 2000 for tech, but nothing like what happened here. So once you have the bubble, the last thing before the bust, what happened to banks? Banks begin to shut their doors. When banks begin to shut their doors, that's when we get the bust. So that's it. Now, the key things about this for a bust, it's demand and supply. Those are the key things here. People buying goods and those who are producing goods. And one more thing. They call this the deflationary curve. The deflationary curve. That going down. That's why when there's like prices dropping, it's like, oh no. That means people aren't making money. That means that they can't pay back their debts. That means there's a cycle of debt growing. You might think as a consumer, hey, prices are dropping, that's great. But if prices drop across the board, that means companies won't be able to stay open much longer. And yeah, prices drop, big deal if you don't have money. And so with that, by the way, all these things I put up here, we just do the opposite then, can't we? For everything except for one thing. Oh, by the way, what is confidence do? We go from, we're all going to get rich, it's going to go on forever, till we're all going to die. Doom is coming. And it's like that, where people are like trusting everybody and making money in a boom to, you're trying to steal my money. Those banks are trying to steal my money. I'm going to hold on. I'm going to hoard my money. And one more thing I should add, it's debt. Debt doesn't necessarily go down. If everybody tries to start paying back their debt, God, we have so much debt, we got to start paying this off. Just imagine back to the goat scenario, because we do have a goat-based world now. So let's say when times are good, I used all my money, I borrowed a bunch of money, and I bought 1,000 goats. So every day of the week, I could have at least 3 goats around. I'm not really sure how that works. That doesn't make any sense. I'm going to throw them away when they're done. Well, I want new goats. Now I decide I got to pay back my goat debt. So I start selling my goats. See what I'm doing? To make money, right? I get rid of some of my assets. Ever get what I'm doing by that? What's everybody else doing at the same time? They're all selling their goats too. If we're all selling our goats at the same time, what happens to the price of the goats? AK, what happens to the price of our assets? If we all start selling at once. So if you know anything about the housing market in Helena in 2008, everybody sold their houses at the same time. It hurt here if you're trying to sell your house. If you lived in a place like Phoenix or Las Vegas or Atlanta or the entire state of Florida, everybody sold at once and it was just, prices just tanked. Or Willis did 2 years ago. So with that, how do you get out of this? By the way, we're going to make another curve here. Anybody want to guess the name of this curve? Prices start to go up. How do you get prices to go up? You got to get people to buy your goods. So something's got to trigger demand. Wages are so low that companies can start hiring workers. People have hoarded their money so long they start buying some necessities. But here's the biggie, government. Every single time there's been some change in government spending. 1876, 1877, the government spent a lot of money. That's when they get the land grants like the Northern Pacific and the Santa Fe Railroad. In the Great Depression, the New Deal built dams, roads, bridges, and then a really big government building program called World War II. We had a small one in 2009 to stimulate the economy, but they cut spending in 2010, so it had a limited effect, but didn't stop the free fall. But once demand, what happens to supply of goods if people start buying things? Starts to go up a little bit. That company's like, ooh, people are buying this stuff, maybe I'll produce a little bit more. When they produce a little bit more, what happens to employment eventually? Start hiring a few workers, and what does that trigger? More demand. And then, the last two things, banks begin to feel like we can loan money again. We can start loaning money. And lastly, the last thing to go up, wages begin to go up, and that's when you start getting signs of growth. That's when you get this feeling of prices going up, wages going up, we're all making money, things are looking good. Now, thing about it is then, how do you get out of a bust? And how do you make sure the boom won't get so big that they turn to overproduction? When it comes right down to it, do we play with how much people buy or how much they make? Supply and demand. And one more thing I'm going to add for the bell rings. What economist came up with this in 1867? Figured it out. Brilliant economist. Even though when he wrote this up, not a lot of people believed it because he had another ideology. And this proved to him that capitalism was inherently flawed. Karl Marx. This is Karl Marx who did it. The man who wrote the Communist Manifesto 20 years before that. And by the way, who does good in a bust? If you have wealth and there's deflation, does your wealth go up in value? And one more thing, just imagine you had a company that survived the boom. What happened to all your competitors? Can't you scoop them up at bargain basement prices? Who does this help? The big. Every bust, out of it, the group of people on top gets smaller. Wealth is concentrated even more. Every time. And to Marx, that was the fatal flaw. Wow, we went through a lot to it. Did you like my picture? Was that good? We'll do more pictures. Oh, and then food day's coming up. That'll be long. Spam for everybody. And then we'll.
Yeah, no, like.
Oh, we gotta do 50s horror movies. Special topics. Netherlands. Tulips. Tulip mania, yeah. You know about that? You know. In the Netherlands? Yeah. And the South Seas bubble involved. It's a great story. It actually is.